something is happening in Britain right now that almost nobody is talking about properly. Not in the mainstream press, not in Parliament, not in most financial content you will find online. Everyone is talking about baby boomers retiring. Everyone is talking about the strain on the NH and the pressure on the state pension. But they are leaving out the shockwaves. They are leaving out what actually happens to the British economy, to British society, to the housing market, to small businesses, to the national insurance system, when the generation that built modern Britain is not just retiring, but is gone. Today, we are going to go through 6 crises that will unfold over the next 10 to 20 years as the UK loses this generation. And we are going to show you the specific numbers behind each one, because when you see the data laid out together, the scale of what is coming becomes genuinely difficult to overstate. Let us start with the numbers, because without the scale, nothing else makes sense. A site index, SCO 45 1NAs of 2024. There were approximately 13.4 million baby boomers in the United Kingdom, ranging in age from 60 to 78. /site. That is 13.4 million people. The largest generational cohort in British history. A generation that grew up in the post-war economic boom, lived through the great property appreciation of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, built businesses, raised families, and accumulated a share of Britain's wealth unlike anything that came before or since. And here is the number that changes everything. Excite Index stuck for 119 according to the ONS. Mid-2025 was the final year in which births outnumbered deaths in the United Kingdom. From 2026 onwards, the gap is projected to widen significantly, with approximately 450,000 more deaths than births expected over the next decade. City. Britain has crossed a demographic threshold. And the force driving it is the baby boom generation entering its highest mortality decades. Site Index SCUC 41 1 by 2034. The number of people of pensionable age is projected to increase by 1.8 million to reach 14.2 million, meaning retirees will make up a full fifth of the UK population. Site. Site Index SCUC 43, the fastest growing segment of Britain's population is people aged 85 and over, who numbered 1.75 million by mid-2024 and are projected to more than double to 3.6 million by mid-2049. Aim/Site. This is not a health story. It is not a pension story. It is an economic story. A business story, a housing story, a national insurance story. And it is happening now. Crisis number 1 is the Great Brain Drain, and this is the one that almost nobody is discussing. We talk about the labor shortage. We talk about unfilled jobs. But what we almost never talk about is what leaves with the people. Because it is not just their labor hours that disappear. It is their knowledge. Specifically, it is the kind of knowledge that cannot be taught in a classroom, cannot be uploaded into an AI system, and cannot be transferred through a training manual. It is practical, applied, earned, through experienced knowledge of how industries actually work at the operational level. Britain's baby boomers represent between 25 and 45% of the workforce across most major industries. In some sectors, the situation is already critical. The average age in insurance brokerage is over 60. Skilled trades including plumbing, electrical work, and construction face an acute shortage of experienced workers, with no pipeline of replacements close to sufficient. Manufacturing, accounting, architecture, healthcare, and the legal profession all face similar demographic cliffs within the next decade. The NH alone employs hundreds of thousands of staff over the age of 55, many of whom carry decades of clinical knowledge that cannot simply be hired in from elsewhere or replaced by a newly graduated cohort. The health service is already struggling with this transition, and the pressure will intensify significantly through the early 2030s. What is important to understand is that this is not primarily an immigration or recruitment problem. You cannot hire your way out of a knowledge drain. The knowledge that leaves with a 65-year-old master electrician or a 68-year-old hospital consultant or a 72-year-old family solicitor is not sitting in a book somewhere waiting to be transferred. It is embedded in decades of practical experience. And it walks out of the building when they retire or when they die. Crisis number 2 is the spending void, and this one will reshape entire industries. Baby boomers control an enormous share of British consumer spending. They spend on healthcare, on home maintenance and improvement, on travel, on hospitality, on financial services, on vehicles, and on the thousands of goods and services that sustain a significant portion of the British economy. As this generation moves through retirement and eventually into very old age and death, that spending does not simply transfer to younger generations on a pound-for-pound basis. It contracts, it changes in character, and in some categories, it disappears entirely. The spending patterns of a 65-year-old are fundamentally different to those of a 45-year-old, which are fundamentally different to those of a 25-year-old. Certain sectors, including cruise operators, mobility aids, over 60s holiday specialists, hearing care, and many healthcare services, will see demand balloon through the 2030s as all baby boomers are simultaneously in their highest consumption of these services years. And then, from the late 2030s onward, that same demand will collapse. The swing will not be gradual, it will be sharp. Industries that scaled up to meet peak boomer demand will face a structural contraction in their customer base within a decade of reaching that peak. And the generation taking their place in the economy, Generation X and Millennials, will spend differently, value differently, and will not fill the gap in the same categories or in the same volumes. The transition is not just a slowdown. In some industries, it will be a discontinuity. Crisis number 3 is the great wealth transfer. And it is not what most people think. Everyone has heard the headline, Excite Index cut for 1 an, estimated 5.5 trillion to 7 trillion pounds will change hands from baby boomers to younger generations in the UK over the next 30 years. This represents the biggest intergenerational transfer of assets in British history. /site property, pensions, savings, business, interests, investment portfolios built over decades of compounding. It sounds like a generational lottery. But here is what the headline almost never includes. The distribution of that wealth transfer is extraordinarily unequal. And it will create a division between those who inherit and those who do not, that will reshape the social landscape of Britain more profoundly than almost any policy decision any government could make. The top 10% of inheritors will receive a disproportionate share of this £5.5 trillion. Excite Index to 55-1, when according to research by wealth consultancy Williams Group, without intergenerational financial planning, only 30% of inherited wealth will be left for the following generation. By the time grandchildren have children of their own, 90% of that family fortune will be gone /sighty. But the more immediate problem is the people at the bottom of the distribution. The roughly half of the younger British population who will inherit nothing, or something so small it makes no material difference to their financial lives. For this group, the great wealth transfer is not an opportunity. It is an event that makes the financial gap between them and the inheritors permanently and dramatically wider. Property ownership in Britain is already shaped significantly by parental wealth. The Bank of Mum and Dad is already the 9th largest mortgage lender in the country. Over the next 20 years, as £5.5 trillion changes hands unevenly, the distinction between those whose families accumulated wealth through the post-war economic boom and those whose families did not will become the most powerful determinant of individual financial outcomes in Britain. That is a social and political earthquake that we have not yet fully reckoned with. And there is a further complication that very few people are discussing. Excite Index SUS 51, one from April 2027, unused pension funds will be brought into the taxable estate for inheritance tax purposes. This is a significant change. Many people have been treating their pension as a tax-efficient vehicle for passing wealth to the next generation. From 2027, that changes. Slight. Tens of billions of pounds that were being preserved inside pension wrappers for intergenerational transfer will instead be subject to 40% inheritance tax, changing the planning calculations of hundreds of thousands of families simultaneously. Crisis number 4 is the small business collapse. And this is the silent wealth destruction that almost nobody is preparing for. Baby boomers own an enormous number of Britain's small and medium-sized businesses. The local solicitor's practice, the family-owned builder's merchant, the independent accountancy firm, the neighborhood restaurant that has been there for 30 years, the precision engineering company that employs 20 people and manufactures components for the aerospace sector. Tens of thousands of businesses across Britain are currently owned and operated by people in their 60s and early 70s who built those businesses over decades and who are now approaching the point where they need to either sell, pass on, or close. And the statistics on what happens to these businesses are deeply uncomfortable. Research consistently shows that a large majority of UK small business owners approaching retirement do not have a succession plan. Many have never had the conversation about what happens to the business after them. Selling a business is expensive, time-consuming, and requires a level of professional advisory support that many smaller business owners never engage with. Finding a buyer who wants to take over a specific local business in a specific local market is genuinely difficult, particularly for businesses that depend heavily on the personal relationships and reputation of the current owner. The result is that billions of pounds of business value, representing decades of work, will simply vanish. Not sold. Not transferred. Closed, the jobs go with them. The services go with them. The local knowledge and supplier relationships and community economic contribution go with them. The communities in which these businesses operate are left with gaps that large chains and online platforms partially fill, but never fully replace. This is value destruction at a scale that Britain has never experienced before, and it is already beginning. Crisis number 5 is the housing silver tsunami. And this one will hit some parts of Britain very hard indeed. Britain has spent years in a housing crisis defined by undersupply, not enough homes being built, not enough stock coming to market, prices rising faster than incomes, young people locked out of ownership. And all of that remains true and real and serious. But something is about to happen on the other side of the market that will complicate this picture enormously. Over the next 15 years, millions of homes owned by baby boomers will come to market, not because owners are choosing to sell, not because they are upgrading or downsizing by choice, but because they are dying. Site Index Flex 43 the number of people aged 85 and over in Britain is projected to more than double from 1.75 million today to 3.6 million by 2049. /seat. These are people who, in very large numbers, own their homes outright, with no mortgage. As this generation ages and dies, those homes will either be sold by estates, inherited by children, or come to market in volumes that, in certain parts of the country, will be genuinely transformative. In some regions of Britain, particularly coastal and rural retirement destinations, the proportion of housing stock owned by the over 70s is already very high. As this population ages through the late 2020s and 2030s, the volume of homes coming to market in these areas will bear no relationship to local demand, which in many of these areas is stagnant or declining. The result in those areas will be softening or falling house prices, excess inventory, and communities with more empty or for-sale properties than they have buyers to absorb them. In cities and growing towns with strong inward migration, the dynamic will be different. Inherited properties and estate sales in these markets will add to supply, which for buyers currently locked out of the market could represent genuine opportunity. But the geographic distribution of this silver tsunami will be deeply uneven, and for some communities, the impact will be a housing market that looks very different within a decade from how it looks today. Crisis number 6 is the national insurance crisis, and this is the one that threatens to break the entire model. Britain's welfare state, including the N8 and the state pension, is funded primarily through national insurance contributions paid by people who are working. The model depends on a ratio, enough workers putting money in to cover the benefits flowing out. That ratio is already under pressure, and over the next 15 years, it is going to shift in ways that the system was never designed to handle. In 1960, there were roughly 5 working-age people for every retired person in Britain. Today, that ratio has already fallen to around 3 to 2. By 2040, it is projected to approach 2 to 1, 2 workers supporting 1 retiree. And as the baby boomer generation moves through its highest mortality decades in the late 2030s and 2040s, the number of very elderly people making intensive demands on NH resources will simultaneously peak before contracting sharply. The NH faces a double bind. Demand from the very elderly is about to hit its highest point ever, requiring maximum resources, maximum staff, and maximum capacity. But the workforce supplying those resources is itself aging, with a large cohort of experienced NHS staff due to retire within the next decade. And on the funding side, the national insurance contributions supporting the entire system will come under increasing pressure as the ratio of workers to recipients continues to move in the wrong direction. The state pension alone costs over £100 billion per year and is rising. The OBA projects that the triple lock commitment alone will add £15.5 billion to that cost by 2030. The arithmetic of this situation does not resolve itself cleanly. It resolves through some combination of higher contributions from workers, reduced benefits, later access ages, or structural reform of the welfare model. All of those options involve either higher costs for working people, worse outcomes for retirees, or both. So what does all of this mean for you? Because that is always the question that matters most. The honest answer is that these are not abstract economic problems. They are forces that will shape the financial circumstances of every person living and working in Britain over the next 20 years. The housing market you buy into, the NH you rely on, the state pension you receive, the business landscape you operate in, the inheritance you may or may not receive, the national insurance you pay, all of these will be shaped by the demographic transition that is already underway. Understanding it clearly is not pessimism. It is the prerequisite for making the decisions that actually protect and improve your position. The people who benefit from the opportunities that come with this transition. The businesses that become available to buy at fair prices. The homes that come to market in growth areas. The careers that open up as experienced workers retire. The wealth planning strategies that become available before the April 2027 inheritance tax changes will be the people who understood what was coming and prepared. Britain has never been through anything like this. The generation that built modern Britain is leaving, and the country they leave behind will be defined not by that departure itself, but by how the generations that follow choose to respond to it. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what is coming, please hit the like button and subscribe to UK Finance with Peter for more straight-talking content on money, the economy, and what they mean for people living and working in Britain. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.